What if the one person you thought you could trust was the one leading you into the darkest betrayal? A devoted pastor, a secret no one saw coming, and a truth so shocking it shakes an entire congregation to its core. This is the story they tried to bury, but today it comes to light.
For months, the young girl silently endured his cruelty, but when he crossed the line, her father, the notorious mafia boss of the town, made him pay according to the rules of the underworld. West Ridge High School was always bustling, but Ava Moretti remained quiet, like a shadow among the crowd. The 13-year-old girl was shy, socially withdrawn, and had no close friends. Her frail figure, black hair always falling to cover half her face, and dark brown eyes made her seem separated from everyone. West Ridge was not a place for the weak. Here, status and power dictated everything. If you didn't have a strong group of friends behind you, you'd become prey. Eva had no one beside her, but that didn't mean she was weak. She was just waiting, because no one at West Ridge knew a horrifying truth. Her father was Vincent Vince Moretti, a notorious mafia boss. At school, Connor Hayes was the one in control. The son of Gregory Hayes, a businessman who owned a chain of hotels, Connor lived like a little prince on campus. Not only was he rich, but he also had a sharp tongue and the absolute confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in his life. He enjoyed the feeling of control, liked making others fear him, and when he saw a quiet, unprotected girl, he knew immediately who his next target would be. Ava Moretti. At first, he just saw her as a small amusement. He nudged her shoulder in the hallway, no response. He dropped her books in class. She just silently bent down to pick them up. What was interesting about someone like that? But then, he started noticing something strange. Eva was not like the other weaklings. Most students being bullied would avert their eyes, tremble, or try to seek help from teachers. But Eva never complained, never begged, and never showed any fear. She just looked him straight in the eye, neither provoking nor avoiding him. That made Connor uncomfortable, and so he decided to take things further. He didn't know that one small mistake could ruin his life. He didn't know who he was messing with. Connor Hayes wasn't the type to give up halfway. Once he had his sights set on someone, he would crush them to the very end, all to satisfy his own arrogant ego. And when Eva Moretti stood there, silent, unreactive like the weaklings he was used to, it only fueled his desire to break her even more. He started to escalate the cruelty. No longer were there light shoves in the hallways or petty food tosses, but harsh jabs strong enough to make Eva lose her balance. Moments where he blocked her path in front of the classroom just to whisper venomous taunts. Still keeping your head down, Moretti? Scared? Or are you just the invisible type, the one no one cares about? He would throw her things on the floor, step on her books, and every time she bent down to pick them up, he would sneer and stand with his arms crossed, watching like a warden observing a prisoner. Eva stayed silent. She didn't complain, didn't attempt to resist, nor did she beg for help. But in that silence, Connor made a huge mistake. Connor Hayes always felt safe because he was the son of Gregory Hayes, a powerful businessman with far-reaching connections. In this town, the Hayes family held significant influence over local politicians, owned a hotel empire, and had the means to bribe anyone who needed to be bought. He had seen his father solve countless problems with money and legal threats. A teacher tried to suspend him for fighting. His father made a call, and the next day the teacher was mysteriously transferred. A student dared to complain about him to the administration. Suddenly, the student's parents lost their jobs under mysterious circumstances. So, Connor never feared anything. He thought he was invincible. He thought no one could touch him. And that's why he kept pushing Eva into corners, not realizing he was poking the wrong person. Connor knew that bullying behind someone's back wasn't enough. He wanted to turn Eva into a laughingstock before the entire school, to extinguish any spark of rebellion she might have inside. That afternoon, in the crowded cafeteria, he stood up from his table and walked straight to Eva's, as if the place was his personal stage. He snatched her lunch bag without hiding it, waving it in the air like a trophy. "Let me guess, peanut butter and jelly," he laughed, tearing open the bag and pulling out the simple sandwich inside. He raised an eyebrow, feigning exaggerated surprise. "Really? This is all you've got? Your family's so poor, Moretti? Or is your dad up to something shady that he can't even afford a decent meal?" Laughter erupted from his table. His followers clapped, whistled, and cheered like they were watching an excellent comedy show. Some other students turned to look, a few laughed along, while others stayed silent, but no one intervened. No one dared intervene. Eva remained still, her gaze fixed on Connor, not a word of protest. Her silence bothered him. He wanted to see her cry, get angry, beg him to stop. But she didn't do that. So he did more. Connor forcefully threw the sandwich on the floor. "Pick it up, you lowlife." Eva didn't move. Connor suddenly smiled wickedly, lifting his foot and stomping down hard, crushing the sandwich into the white tiles of the cafeteria. A mushy stain spread across the floor, pieces of bread scattered everywhere. Oops. The laughter reverberated throughout the room. Some students lowered their heads, avoiding the sight. A few covered their mouths, struggling to suppress their laughter. But all of them witnessed it. Eva still didn't react. She just stared at Connor. No anger, no hurt, no sorrow, only a quiet, sharp look, like a blade. And for a brief moment, just a fleeting instant, Connor felt uncomfortable. The feeling passed over him like a shadow, so fast he didn't even realize it at first. But it was there. Eva bent down, picking up her backpack without a word, not even glancing at the mess Connor had just made. She walked down the hallway, weaving through the crowd that was still buzzing from the humiliation moments ago. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. But there was one person who remembered everything very clearly. Her father. Connor Hayes didn't know it, but he had just signed his own death sentence. Connor Hayes had never been one to quit halfway. Once he set his sights on someone, he would cling to them like a predator, never letting go. But Eva Moretti was unlike anyone he had ever tormented before. She didn't cry, didn't resist, didn't beg for help, nor did she try to avoid him. She just stood there, silent and calm, looking at him as if he were nothing worth her attention. This made Connor uneasy to the point of madness. He couldn't accept being ignored. He couldn't stand the feeling of not having control over Eva. A person like him, who grew up spoiled, had never encountered anyone who wasn't afraid of him. Did this girl dare not fear him? Did she dare challenge him with her silence? He had to change that. He had to make her break. And this time, he didn't just want to humiliate her in front of everyone. He wanted her to feel as if the entire world had turned its back on her. He wanted her to know that he could make her the lowest, most pitiful person in everyone's eyes. The next morning, when Eva stepped into school, she immediately sensed something was different in the air. More eyes were staring at her than usual, and whispers emerged whenever she passed a group of students. Some laughed mockingly at her, others just glanced and quickly turned away. Some students looked at her with strange expressions, both intrigued and somewhat cautious. She didn't need to ask what was happening. She already had the answer when she opened her phone. Her inbox was flooded with messages from numbers she didn't recognize. "Are you seriously crazy? What's wrong with you, Moretti? I thought you were just a freak. Didn't know you were a psycho." Eva slowly opened the first message, which had a photo attached. She looked at the screen and immediately understood what had happened. The photo was from the previous day when she had faced Connor in the cafeteria. But something was off. Her face in the picture had been distorted, her eyes elongated and darkened, her mouth twisted into a grotesque smirk, creating a haunting image. At the top of the photo, a glaring red caption was bolded, "Psycho Moretti," and it had spread all over the school. She scrolled down to find hundreds of comments beneath it. "This girl looks terrifying. Guess that's why she's always so quiet, like a serial killer. Who knows, maybe one day she'll bring a gun to school." Eva didn't feel scared. She wasn't surprised. She was used to people like Connor and the dirty tricks they would use to ruin someone's life. But there was something else, something colder creeping inside her. It wasn't pain, it wasn't fear, but a feeling of emptiness. An emptiness of someone who had become all too familiar with ruthless power games and knew that it was time to play by her own rules. This photo wasn't something that could just appear by chance. Someone had edited it, someone had spent time creating it and posting it online. And Eva knew exactly who had done it. Connor Hayes. He no longer just wanted to bully her in the shadows. He wanted the whole world to turn against her. He wanted her to feel alone, to become the laughingstock of the school. And the saddest part was that others had so easily gotten swept up into his game. Those who had never cared about her before now looked at her with either contempt or fear. Eva closed her phone and stuffed it into her pocket. She walked down the hallway as though nothing had happened. No reaction, no anger, no sorrow. But in her heart she remembered everything. That night, when she stepped through the iron gates of the Moretti estate, she knew she didn't need to do anything, because someone else was remembering everything very clearly. The living room of the mansion was illuminated by soft yellow lights, reflecting off the exquisitely crafted marble walls. The atmosphere was quiet. Only the sound of glasses clinking softly between the men in black suits sitting around the large table. They exchanged low words, each one heavy, as if carrying the weight of millions of dollars or someone's life. In the center of the room, Vincent Moretti sat on a black leather chair, like an emperor in his kingdom. In his hand was a glass of whiskey, amber and gleaming in the light. His hair was slightly graying, his sharp eyes and a faded scar on his left jaw made him look like a man who had just stepped out of a bloody tale. When Eva entered, he didn't look at her immediately. He merely raised his glass, swirling the liquid inside as if considering something very important. "What's going on, daughter?" His voice was deep, but there was no trace of worry in it. Eva said nothing. She silently pulled out her phone, opened the photo, and placed it right in front of her father. The room fell silent. No one said a word. The men around the table stopped talking. Their eyes all turned to Vincent, waiting for his reaction. Vincent looked at the phone screen, his gaze sweeping over every detail. His daughter's distorted face, the Psycho Moretti caption in bright red, the malicious comments. He didn't need to ask anything more, didn't need to hear any explanations. He had seen enough. Slowly, Vincent placed his glass on the table. He took the cigar out of his mouth, tapped the ash into the marble ashtray, then looked up, his eyes dark as a bottomless abyss. Who did this? His voice wasn't loud, but each word sounded like a death sentence being signed. Eva stared straight into her father's eyes. Connor Hayes. In the silent room, Vincent Moretti's smile slowly appeared. Dangerous, like a predator who had finally found its prey. Connor Hayes had opened a door he should never have opened, and this time, Eva no longer needed to stay silent. Inside the Moretti mansion, the atmosphere remained as silent as a dark, still lake. but everyone knew that the storm had officially begun. Vincent Moretti was not a man prone to outbursts. He did not get angry the way ordinary men did. There were no shouts, no bursts of rage, no meaningless threats. Instead, he remained silent, his eyes sharp as cold blades scanning those around him. His silence was a dangerous signal that even his closest associates dared not break. Every wealthy man had his enemies, but with Vincent Moretti, no one dared to remain his enemy for long. Those who had opposed him in the past were either forgotten or buried beneath the concrete of some street in this city. And now, a high school kid dared to humiliate his daughter on his own turf. Vincent held the cigar in his hand, slowly bringing it to his mouth, but he did not smoke. He was thinking. In his mind, hundreds of ways to retaliate flashed by, but he did not need to rush. He was a man who understood that time always favored the one in power. He placed the cigar down on the marble ashtray, then gently leaned forward. Make it disappear. Just a few hours later, the maliciously edited photo of Eva vanished from all social media platforms. No one knew what had happened. Posts containing the photo disappeared instantly, even in private chat groups, as if they had never existed. Accounts that had posted or shared the photo were suddenly disabled, and no one could log in again. Some even dared not speak a word, for they had received anonymous messages, brief yet enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. Delete it now, before I come for you. Connor Hayes, of course, was aware of this. That evening, he lay lazily on his bed, scrolling through his phone, pleased to see that the rumors were still spreading. The whole school had started calling Ava Psycho Moretti. But in the blink of an eye, the posts vanished right before his eyes one by one. He tried to refresh the page, but all he saw was a blank screen. He opened Instagram, and his account had been logged out. When he tried to log in again, a notification appeared. This account does not exist. Connor furrowed his brow and tried checking his friends' phones in the group, but they were all facing the same issue. What the hell was going on? Little did he know, this was just the beginning. At exactly midnight, in the vast Hayes mansion, the landline rang. It was an internal line, used only by family members. This meant only a few people knew this number. Gregory Hayes, Connor's father, was a man who always had the habit of going to bed early and despised being disturbed in the middle of the night. He never answered calls outside business hours unless it was a matter of business. But when he saw the unfamiliar number on the screen, a sense of unease washed over him. With visible annoyance, he picked up the phone. Hello? On the other end, there was a brief silence, but not the usual kind of silence. This was the silence of someone holding absolute power, allowing the other person to feel the pressure before speaking. Then a low voice spoke. Tell your son to behave before I teach him my way. No introduction. No long-winded speech. Gregory Hayes knew exactly who he was speaking to. The hand holding the phone tightened, but he was no fool. Vincent Moretti was not a businessman. He was not a politician. He was not the type to compromise with money or covert deals. He was the darkness that no one wanted to face. Gregory tried to keep his voice calm. Vincent, I don't think this is something we need to blow out of proportion. It's just a bunch of kids messing around, nothing serious. The other end remained silent for a few seconds. Then Vincent exhaled slowly. We're both fathers, Gregory. If someone touched your son, what would you do? Gregory opened his mouth to say something, but Vincent continued, his voice deep, yet filled with cold menace. If someone touches my daughter, I'll bury him 6 feet under. There was no anger in Vincent's voice, only truth. Gregory felt his throat go dry. This wasn't a warning. It was a sentence. "I'll talk to Connor." Gregory's voice had turned hoarse. "Good," Vincent said, then hung up without another word. Meanwhile, Connor Hayes had no idea what storm was about to hit him. He was still lying in bed, frustrated over losing his account, but he didn't think it was anything serious. But just minutes after his father finished the call with Vincent, the door to his room burst open violently. Gregory Hayes walked in, his face ashen as if he had seen death itself. Connor jumped up in surprise. "Dad, what's going on?" Gregory did not answer immediately. He just stood there, looking at his son with a mixture of anger and fear in his eyes. Then, slowly, he walked over, placed both hands on Connor's shoulders, squeezing tightly, and growled each word. "What have you done to Vincent Moretti's daughter?" Connor frowned. He was about to respond casually, but when he looked into his father's eyes, he realized something. For the first time in his life, he saw his father afraid, and it was at that moment that he began to feel real unease. But he still didn't understand who he had just crossed. Connor Hayes was not the type to easily be scared. He had spent his entire life sheltered by the wealth, power, and status of his family. He had never faced any serious consequences, never felt the sensation of being placed in a vulnerable position. But tonight, for the first time in his life, he began to feel that something was terribly wrong. The party that night went on like any other rich kid's party. A lavish mansion, expensive cocktails, and the heirs of vast fortunes gathered, bragging about money they had never had to work for. Connor was the center of his group, as confident as a king in his own kingdom. But amidst the laughter and chatter, he couldn't shake off the unsettling feeling from the conversation he had earlier with his father. Gregory Hayes had not been clear about what Vincent Moretti had done, but he had given a very clear warning. "Stop. Now." Connor had only laughed dismissively. He didn't believe the stories about Moretti. Mafia? He might have been some old gangster, but who still believed in people like that nowadays? He thought his father was just exaggerating the whole thing. Just a bully picking on a weak kid. Just some girl who couldn't handle the pressure. What could possibly be so serious to make his father fear like this? But he would soon realize just how wrong he was. The party ended around 1 a.m. Connor left the mansion, slightly dizzy from a few drinks, even though he wasn't old enough to be drinking. He walked to the parking lot, fumbling through his pockets for his car keys. Just as he was about to unlock his car, a sleek black Cadillac quietly parked in front of him. Connor stopped, narrowing his eyes. Before he could react, two men in suits stepped out. The streetlights cast shadows on their faces, revealing cold, indifferent features with no trace of friendliness or coincidence. One of them spoke, his voice deep and crisp, like an order that couldn't be refused. "Hey, get in the car." Connor smirked, trying to remain calm. "Who do you think you are? Some kind of security guards?" But when the car door opened, his smile faded. Inside the car, Vincent Moretti was sitting, waiting. The streetlight illuminated his face, accentuating the sharp features of a man who had no time for trivial matters. He wore a perfect black suit, his tie neatly knotted, one hand resting on his knee, the other holding a cigar. His eyes were dark and deep like an abyss, cold as if they were looking right through Connor's soul. His voice was deep, not needing to be loud, but each word carried undeniable weight. "We need to talk, kid." Connor had never thought of refusing an offer like this. He swallowed hard, trying to appear unafraid, but his feet felt like they were glued to the ground. The two men in the front seat didn't move, but with just a glance, Connor knew he had no choice. He slowly stepped into the car, feeling as if he was walking into the jaws of a predator, unaware of when he would be devoured. The door shut behind him, isolating him from the world outside. Inside the car, the atmosphere was eerily quiet. The scent of premium leather mixed with the strong aroma of cigars, creating a suffocating feeling, as though the air itself carried the weight of unspoken words. Vincent Moretti maintained his relaxed posture, but his gaze never left Connor for a second. He lowered the cigar, tapping the ash into a crystal ashtray. "Connor Hayes," he said slowly, as if savoring each word. "Do you know why you're sitting here?" Connor tried to swallow. "I don't." Vincent raised a finger, cutting him off immediately. "Don't lie." There was no yelling, no threats, but the atmosphere in the car became so heavy that Connor felt like he couldn't breathe. Vincent leaned back in his seat, folding his arms. "You humiliated my daughter in front of the whole school. You doctored photos of her, spread rumors, turned her into a joke, and you think you're not going to pay for that?" Connor opened his mouth to say something, but as soon as he moved, the two men in the front seat turned to look at him. One cold stare, a warning without words. Connor had never felt so small. Vincent Moretti was in no hurry. He slowly took a small knife from his jacket pocket, flipping the shiny silver blade in his hand as if it were just a toy. He looked straight at Connor, smiling slightly. "You know, Connor, I'm a very patient man. I've learned to wait, to observe, to listen. But there is one thing I will never forgive." He tilted his head, his voice dropping to a cold, steely tone. "Touch my family." Connor could hear his heartbeat pounding in his chest. Vincent slowly raised the knife, gently running the blade across his own finger, testing its sharpness. "Your father called me," he continued, his voice unchanged. "He begged me not to do anything to you. He said you're just a kid, that you don't know what you're doing. But I don't believe in stupidity. I believe in consequences." Connor began to tremble. Vincent looked at him for a moment longer, then slowly put the knife away. He didn't need to do anything. He had already won the moment Connor sat in that car. "Now, listen closely," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You will disappear from my daughter's life. You will never dare look at her again. If I hear your name connected to her again, I won't call your father. I won't give a warning. I'll come for you." Vincent smiled, but there was no kindness in that smile. "And I'll make sure that when I do, you'll never laugh again." Connor didn't need any more threats. He understood all too well. And for the first time in his life, Connor Hayes understood what true fear felt like. As the car door slammed shut behind Connor Hayes, and the black Cadillac silently rolled into the night, he didn't realize that his life had taken a completely different turn. No one knew exactly what had happened inside that car, but when it stopped in front of the Hayes mansion, Connor stepped out with trembling legs, a pale face, and his hand clutching his coat as if trying to keep himself from collapsing. That night, he didn't sleep. His room was immersed in darkness, but his eyes were wide open, as if at any moment a shadow could appear from the corner of the room, as if Vincent Moretti were still there, standing right before him, whispering horrifying warnings into his ear. He didn't dare leave the bed. He didn't dare check his phone. Everything inside him had changed. The next morning, West Ridge High School opened like any other day. Students huddled by their lockers, gossiping about trivial things, basketball games, the latest rumors in the school. But as soon as the bell rang to signal the start of the first period, something unusual began to surface. Connor Hayes was absent from school. No one saw him walk through the school gates in the morning. There was no sound of his laughter echoing from the hallway corner. There was no image of him standing among his rich friends, bragging about the luxury items he owned or humiliating others just to amuse himself. At first, no one thought much of it. Maybe he was just sick or skipping school like he had done many times before. But then, a rumor started to spread, slinking through the hallways and classrooms, passed from one person to another like a cold winter wind. I heard Connor was threatened by someone. Last night, someone saw a black car take him away. I heard he's too scared to leave his room. No one knew where this rumor started, but the more people heard it, the heavier it seemed to become. Then another theory was added, making everything even more sinister. I heard his parents are trying to send him abroad. That was when things got serious. Inside the Hayes mansion, a dark atmosphere enveloped the place. Every door was shut tight, and the curtains were drawn as if trying to hide something from the outside world. Gregory Hayes sat in the armchair, his hand clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Across from him was his wife, Margaret Hayes, who was clearly agitated, her eyes filled with worry as she repeatedly dialed numbers, searching for information, but unable to connect with anyone who could help them. Connor sat in the chair beside them, his face still pale from the night before. He didn't say a word. Since stepping into the house, he had just sat quietly, his eyes blankly staring at his hands, occasionally twitching as though recalling a nightmare he couldn't escape. He had never felt like this before. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. For the first time in his life, he understood what real fear was. Margaret quickly walked over to her husband, her voice tense. "We have to do something, Gregory. Our son." Gregory looked up at his wife. He didn't say anything for a moment, but his gaze was hollow, as if he had realized there was no way out of this situation. Then he sighed. "We have to leave." Margaret's eyes widened. "What? What are you saying? We can't. We have no choice." Gregory interrupted, his voice no longer holding the calm demeanor it usually did. "Don't you understand, Margaret? This is no longer a school issue. This isn't a game. This is Vincent Moretti." That name made Margaret freeze. She knew Moretti. Who in town didn't know him? But she still couldn't accept that their family, a family with money, with status, had to fear someone like him. "We could..." She tried to say something, but Gregory slammed his hand on the table, startling her. "We can't do anything." He emphasized each word. "Someone like Moretti isn't someone you can bribe or negotiate with. He doesn't care about those things. He has one rule. No one touches his family without paying the price." Margaret couldn't say anything more. The entire room fell into a chilling silence. Gregory turned back, looking directly at his son. "Connor." His voice was cold. "Tomorrow, you're not going to school anymore. We'll arrange for you to go somewhere else. Maybe New York, maybe Europe, but you will never come back to this town." Connor looked up at his father. His eyes were filled with fear, but there was something else. Resignation. He knew this was no longer a choice. He had to leave. The rumor continued to spread. No one knew exactly what had happened to Connor, but everyone understood one thing. He was gone. The Hayes mansion became eerily quiet, no longer hosting lavish parties, no longer seeing expensive sports cars driving in and out. The windows were closed, the curtains drawn, and in school, something had changed. The students, the ones who had followed Connor to bully others, were now unusually silent. No one dared mention his name. No one dared mention Eva Moretti. They knew that an era had ended. No warning was needed, no blood was shed. Vincent Moretti had acted, and as always, he left no trace but utter fear. The Hayes mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, now lay immersed in a heavy atmosphere. Gone were the lavish parties, the expensive sports cars parked at the gate. The lights inside still burned, but their glow no longer radiated luxury as before. It now carried an invisible tension. Gregory Hayes sat in an armchair in his office, his hand gripping a glass of wine he had yet to drink. He had once been a proud man, believing money could buy anything, but tonight, for the first time in his life, he felt small. Connor was still upstairs, silent, saying nothing to anyone. He hadn't slept since the previous night. When his father had told him to leave town, he hadn't protested. He knew he had no choice. Gregory had once thought he could control everything. He had dealt with countless competitors, silenced scandals with money and connections. But this time, he couldn't buy safety. He knew Vincent Moretti wasn't the type of man you could negotiate with money. But he had to try. The following afternoon, a sleek black Mercedes rolled into the private grounds of the Moretti estate. 2 bodyguards in suits got out first, scanning the surroundings. Then a middle-aged man with a dignified appearance and streaks of gray in his hair stepped out. Gregory Hayes had come personally to meet Vincent Moretti. The Moretti mansion wasn't the flashy, ostentatious type like his own. Instead, it exuded a quiet, commanding presence. No lavish chandeliers, no garish displays. Everything was refined, powerful, and dangerous, just like the man who ruled this place. Gregory entered the living room, where Vincent was already waiting. Vincent sat behind a heavy mahogany desk, the light from the window casting sharp shadows on his chiseled features. One hand held a cigar, the other slowly swirled a glass of whiskey. There was no smile, no pleasantries, only a deathly silence. Gregory approached, trying to maintain his composure, though each step he took seemed forced. He sat down, but didn't touch the glass of whiskey the servant had placed in front of him. Vincent locked eyes with him. No scorn, no anger, but something about his gaze made Gregory feel exposed. "Why are you here?" Vincent's voice was low, but each word carried weight. Gregory took a deep breath. "I'm here to talk, like grown men." Vincent didn't respond immediately. He lowered his cigar, tapping the ash into a crystal tray before slowly leaning back in his chair. "Talk?" he repeated, as if weighing the meaning of the word. Gregory swallowed hard. "I think things between the kids have gone too far. I understand my son made a mistake, and I'm sorry for that, but he's still just a kid. I hope we can settle this in a way that no one has to suffer unnecessary consequences." Vincent raised an eyebrow as if he found the story amusing. Unnecessary consequences. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. The men stationed in the corners of the room, loyal followers of Moretti, were silent, but Gregory knew they were listening intently to every word. Vincent set his glass down on the table, his dark eyes never leaving Gregory. "You say your son is just a kid," he spoke slowly. "Then tell me this, Gregory. Can a kid alter my daughter's image, tarnish her reputation, turn her into a laughingstock online, then stomp on her meal in front of hundreds of people, all for his amusement? Can that still be called a kid?" Gregory felt his throat tighten. "I'm not saying he was right." He hurried to clarify. "I just want to say he didn't understand the consequences. I believe an apology could—" Vincent abruptly lifted his head, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Apology?" Gregory fell silent. Vincent stood up and slowly walked toward the window, where the setting sun bathed the sky in red. He placed his hand on the frame, lost in thought for a moment, then turned back to Gregory. "Listen carefully, Gregory." His voice dropped, slow and deliberate, as though carving each word into the man's mind. "If your son looks at Eva again, he will disappear." There was no threat, no exaggeration, just a statement as certain as death. Gregory felt a chill run down his spine. He knew Vincent wasn't lying. He wasn't the type to make threats and let them slide. If Connor dared to show himself in front of Eva again, there wouldn't be a second time. Gregory took a deep breath, stood up, trying to hide the tremble in his hands. "I understand," he said quietly, bowing his head to Vincent before turning to leave. He didn't dare look back. As he stepped into the car, the doors to the Moretti estate closed behind him. A clear sign that Vincent had made his decision, and nothing would change that. Gregory Hayes had tried to challenge Vincent Moretti, and now he knew it had been the greatest mistake of his life. When Gregory Hayes left the Moretti mansion that day, he didn't need anyone to remind him of the danger he had just faced. He had seen something few people ever have the chance to witness and live to tell the tale. The eyes of Vincent Moretti when he issued his final warning. There was no anger, no crude threats, just one absolute truth. If Connor dared to show his face in front of Eva again, he would not get a second chance to make a mistake. Gregory understood, and this time he had no other choice. 7 days after that meeting, the Hayes family left town. No official statement, no grand farewell for the once powerful family that had stood at the top of this community. There were no news reports either, as Gregory Hayes didn't want anyone to know the real reason behind their sudden departure. But everyone knew. For a week, the rumors spread like wildfire in the night. Connor was sent to a boarding school in another state. His parents sold the mansion to avoid trouble. There's a rumor that the Hayes family was threatened. No one knew the full truth, but one thing was undeniable. Connor Hayes had disappeared, and no one dared to ask why. West Ridge High School was no longer the same. The people who had once followed Connor, who had mocked Eva, who had participated in the dirty bullying, suddenly became unusually silent. When Eva walked down the hall, she could feel their gazes on her, but there was no ridicule, no smirking smiles, no snickering behind her back. Only silence. Those who had once seen her as a joke now avoided her gaze. Lena Parker, Connor's ex-girlfriend, the one who had laughed loudly when Ava was humiliated in the cafeteria, now lowered her head and avoided eye contact when she saw Eva walking by. Those who had once looked at her with disdain now stared down at the floor, as if afraid that if they accidentally looked into her eyes, something terrible might happen. Eva didn't have to do anything. She just stood there, still the same, as quiet as ever, maintaining that calm demeanor. But this time, no one dared to laugh at her anymore, because they had learned what Connor Hayes had to learn the hardest way. Eva Moretti was not someone they could mess with. Of course, silence didn't mean the story had ended. A few students still whispered and exchanged news in the corners of the school. I heard Eva's dad did something to Connor. No one knows exactly, but after Mr. Moretti called his father, the whole family left town immediately. Do you think they were threatened with death? No matter how the rumors spread, no one dared to verify them. No one dared to say anything in front of Eva. For the first time in her life, Eva walked through the halls of West Ridge without feeling like the smallest person in the school. Not because she wanted them to be afraid, but because she no longer had to be the one at the bottom. 3 days after Connor disappeared, during lunch, Eva sat at her usual corner in the cafeteria, just like any other day. But this time, something was different. A tray was placed in front of her. Eva looked up, her eyes meeting Lena Parker, the girl who had once been one of those who gleefully joined Connor in the cruel jokes aimed at her. Lena no longer wore that mocking smile. She sat down, fiddling with the fork in her hand, as if trying to find words to start the conversation. Finally, she cleared her throat and said softly, "You seem okay." Eva didn't respond. Lena swallowed, continuing in a voice tinged with hesitation. "I just wanted to say, I didn't mean to hurt you or anything. It was just—" Eva placed the fork down on the tray, staring directly at the girl before her. Lena couldn't continue. She couldn't explain her actions, couldn't justify the times she had laughed along with Connor, couldn't justify silently watching as Eva was humiliated. Because, in this moment, both of them knew there was no excuse that would ever be enough. Eva said nothing. She simply stood up, grabbed her tray of food and left, leaving Lena Parker sitting alone at the crowded table, isolated. This time, it was Lena who was left behind. Though Connor was gone, though the ones who had bullied her were now silent, Eva knew things couldn't immediately return to normal. She was still herself, but something had changed, not just the way others saw her, but the way she saw herself. For the first time in her life, Eva realized she had power, not because her father was Vincent Moretti, but because she had survived, overcome, and stood strong through the fiercest storms. Not everyone was lucky enough to have a father like Vincent standing behind them, but even without him, she was no longer the quiet girl waiting to be tormented. She had won, and this time, no one could take that from her. The Moretti mansion was immersed in the quiet atmosphere of the morning. Sunlight streamed through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows on the polished marble floors, reflecting off the large dining table where Vincent Moretti sat. In front of him was a glass of whiskey, even though it was early morning, a habit he had never abandoned. Eva entered the kitchen, her black hair still slightly messy from just waking up. She didn't speak immediately, simply pulling out a chair and sitting across from her father, quietly pouring herself a glass of water. Vincent glanced at his daughter over the rim of his glass, his gaze always sharp, as if he could see through her every thought. But he didn't speak first. He was not the type to rush. Eva took a sip of water, slowly setting the glass down on the table. "What did you do with Connor?" The question echoed in the silence of the kitchen, but there was no fear or anxiety in it. It was simply a question, curious and steady. Vincent raised an eyebrow, as if the question surprised him slightly, but then he shrugged, lifting his glass to his lips, taking a small sip before setting it back down. "This world operates on a simple rule, daughter," he said in a low, steady voice. "The weak will be crushed. But you don't have to be weak." Eva didn't respond immediately. She listened to her father's words, reflecting on them, letting each word sink deeply into her mind. In the past, Eva always felt powerless in the world around her. She was a quiet girl, walking among the crowd, trying not to draw attention, to avoid becoming the target of people like Connor Hayes. But in the end, she still became the target, still found herself in the sights of someone who only knew how to be ruthless to satisfy his ego. She used to think she had no power, that the strong were people like Connor, the ones with status, with friends, with a voice in school. But she was wrong. Connor was not strong. He was just someone who deluded himself into thinking he was strong, relying on the fear of others to feel powerful. But when faced with real power, the kind that no one can challenge, no one can escape from, he collapsed. He ran. He disappeared. Eva realized that the difference between a bully and someone with real power was in who could survive longer. And she had survived. Vincent was still watching Eva, his gaze as sharp as ever, as if trying to read every thought in her mind. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Eva paused for a moment, then lifted her glass of water, gently swirling it in her hand, her gaze never leaving the transparent liquid inside. "Do you ever regret anything?" she asked, her tone calm but carrying a genuine curiosity. Vincent raised an eyebrow, but there was no sign of surprise. He understood that the question wasn't just about Connor, but about everything he had done in his life. He took a long breath, placing his hand on the table, his fingers tapping lightly on the wood in a thoughtful rhythm. "What is regret, Eva?" he asked in return. Eva looked up at her father. It's when someone does something that they later wish they hadn't done. Vincent chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "Then no, I don't regret anything." Eva frowned, but Vincent didn't give her time to respond. He slowly continued. "But that doesn't mean I don't think about the things I've done." He looked at her, his gaze deepening. Power is a double-edged sword. If you have it, you have to know when to use it. And the most important thing is to understand when to act and when not to. Eva didn't answer, but she knew her father was teaching her a lesson. He wasn't just talking about Connor. He was talking about life itself, about how the world works, about the rules that only those at the top truly understand. Before, she had thought power was absolute control, the ability to destroy others, to be untouchable. But when she looked at her father, seeing how he managed everything without raising his voice, without showing off, she understood that true power didn't lie in what others saw, it was in the control within. Connor had lost his power the moment he lost control. He had revealed his fear, let his anxiety eat away at him, and that was the moment he became weak. As for Eva, she was no longer weak, not because her father was Vincent Moretti, but because she had learned to protect herself. She was no longer the girl sitting alone in the cafeteria, trying to make herself invisible. She didn't need to scream, didn't need to retaliate, didn't need to humiliate anyone to feel strong. She just needed to exist, with the absolute confidence that no one could touch her anymore. And that was real power. Vincent lifted his glass of whiskey, took one final sip, and set it down. His eyes glinted with a pride he didn't express too overtly. "You've done well, Eva." Eva looked at her father. "I haven't done anything." Vincent smiled faintly. "Exactly. And that's why you've won." Eva didn't answer, but in her heart she knew her father was right. She didn't need to do anything. The world had turned on its own, as it was meant to, and she had survived longer than the one who thought he could crush her. That morning, as Eva entered the gates of West Ridge High School, she could clearly feel the difference in the way people looked at her. But this time, she didn't lower her head, didn't avoid their gazes, and didn't try to make herself invisible like she used to. For the first time in her life, she walked through the narrow hallways with her back straight, eyes forward, as if she had never been a victim. She didn't need to appear dangerous, didn't need to threaten anyone, and didn't need to seek revenge on anyone. But simply by being there, calm and unafraid, she was enough to make others nervous. There were no more whispers as she passed by, no more sneering smiles, no more scrutinizing glances from Connor's friends, those who had once seen her as their amusement. Everything had changed. When Eva passed by Connor's old group of friends, she saw Lena Parker standing there, her messy blonde hair as if she hadn't slept all night. Lena had been the first to mock Eva every time Connor made fun of her, the one who whispered cruel words behind her back. But today, as Eva walked past, Lena looked down, clutching her backpack straps, as if she just wanted to disappear from that spot. Beside her, some of the boys from Connor's group were no better. no one dared say anything. Before, they would have burst out laughing, nudging each other, gossiping, throwing sarcastic comments to make Eva uncomfortable. But now, they were all silent. Eva didn't have to do anything. It was Connor's absence that had left a void no one in the group could fill. He had been the center of power, the one who ruled through fear, pulling everyone into his cruel spiral. But when he left in a way no one fully understood, they didn't know what to do anymore. They didn't know whether to continue bullying Eva because no one knew what had happened to Connor. And that vague fear was the most terrifying thing. At West Ridge, no one dared to openly take sides, but everyone understood who the real power was. As Eva walked into the classroom, a few students glanced at her, but no one said anything. Some quickly turned away, pretending to focus on their phones or books, but Eva could sense that something had shifted in their eyes. No longer was there pity. No longer was there disdain. For the first time, there was respect. A few people who had been indifferent before now nodded slightly as she passed by. A small gesture, but one that meant more than 1,000 words. Some even mouthed something, as if they wanted to say something, but no one dared speak out, because they knew Eva was no longer the girl being bullied. She wasn't the one sitting alone in the cafeteria anymore, hiding from malicious stares. She had changed. One thing Eva realized that day was this: power wasn't about humiliating others, it was about not letting anyone humiliate you. Connor had used power to control, to spread fear, and manipulate everyone. But that power only existed because others allowed it to. Eva didn't need to do that. She didn't need to prove her strength through revenge, didn't need to appear more dangerous or cold than necessary. She didn't need to stand up in class and shout at the people who had bullied her. Didn't need to try to get justice from anyone, because just by standing there, still unbroken, was the strongest proof. When the bell rang for lunch, Eva no longer quietly left the class like she used to. She stood up, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and walked out with a completely different posture, the posture of someone no longer bound by the past. When Eva sat down at the lunch table, a place where she had always been alone before, it wasn't like that anymore. She was picking up a bite of food when a voice spoke next to her. "Is this seat taken?" Eva looked up and saw a classmate, Sophia Reed, hesitating in front of her. Sophia was a quiet student but had never been part of the bullies. Eva looked at her for a moment, then shrugged. "You can sit here." Sophia sat down, placing her food tray on the table. A while later, another boy from the class pulled out a chair and sat down with them. Eva wasn't used to this. She'd been so accustomed to loneliness, to being the outsider. But this time, she wasn't the outsider anymore. By the end of the day, as Eva walked out of the school gates, she realized something important. She didn't need to win in Connor's game because she had completely stepped out of it. She was no longer the victim. She didn't need to become the villain either. She was simply Eva Moretti, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. Not everyone knows how to face change. Those who once mocked Eva no longer laugh, but their reactions are all different. Some try to act as if nothing ever happened. They say nothing, avoid her, but dare not look her in the eye when they walk past her in the hallway. They avoid her as if afraid that just making eye contact will cause something from her to spread to them, a kind of invisible power, the power that comes from being unyielding. Others, especially those who once sided with Connor, start trying to befriend her. Not because they genuinely feel sorry, but because they understand the balance of power has shifted. In an environment like Westridge, everyone wants to be on the side of the strong. And now, the strong one is no longer Connor. But Eva doesn't care. She doesn't need fake friends. She doesn't need apologies that don't come from the heart, and that is precisely why they all fear her even more. Among those who once stood with Connor, Lena Parker is perhaps the most affected. She used to be part of the power circle, always by Connor's side, laughing when he insulted others, contributing to his dirty games. She was never truly the leader, but she knew how to enjoy the power of someone stronger than herself. But now what? Connor is no longer here, and she doesn't know what role she's supposed to play. For a week after Connor disappeared, Lena didn't dare come near Eva. She saw how the others avoided looking at her, saw how the students began whispering when Lena walked by. She knew she had been forgotten, a puppet with no strings left to pull. But the feeling of being forgotten wasn't what worried her the most. What worried Lena most was Eva. She couldn't understand what Eva was thinking, didn't know if Eva intended to retaliate, and it was that uncertainty that was her greatest fear. Finally, Lena decided she had to do something. That day, after class, when Eva was taking books from her locker, a voice called out behind her, "Eva, wait." Eva didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Lena stood there, hesitating, gripping the strap of her backpack as if it was the only thing that could keep her steady. Eva didn't say anything, just closed her locker and looked directly at Lena, waiting. Lena bit her lip, then took a deep breath. "I just want to say, I'm sorry." Eva raised an eyebrow slightly. Lena continued, her voice trembling. "I didn't think things would go this far. I never really hated you or wanted to hurt you." Eva remained silent, her gaze sharp, as if dissecting every word Lena said to find the truth. Lena looked down at the floor, speaking more softly now. "I just thought I didn't want to be the target, and if standing by Connor meant safety, then I chose the wrong way." Eva stared at Lena for a long moment. Then she gave a faint, hollow smile. There was no anger, no contempt, just a simple, cold understanding. She didn't need to hear this apology, because she already knew the reason. Because this apology wasn't for her, it was for Lena. Because she wanted to shake off the guilt, to seek forgiveness so she could sleep soundly at night. Eva didn't say anything more. She just turned and walked away, leaving Lena standing there, alone, with the apology hanging in the air. Lena didn't try to call her back, because she knew an apology couldn't erase the past. After that conversation, Lena never dared to mention Eva again. She still went to school, still walked the familiar hallways, but no one really stood by her anymore. No Connor, no group of followers. She used to protect herself by standing with the strong, but now the strong one had disappeared, and now she was left all alone. The ones who used to bully Eva didn't fare much better. Some tried to approach her, testing whether they could fill the gap left by Connor, but Eva didn't need them. Some completely avoided her, as if she was a reminder of their mistakes. But whether they tried to befriend her or steer clear, they all feared her. Not because she threatened them, not because she sought revenge, but because they couldn't understand her. They didn't know what she was thinking, didn't know what plans she had, didn't know what she might do next, and that unpredictability scared them more than anything else. Eventually, Eva realized something. True power doesn't lie in revenge, but in existing without fear anymore. She didn't need to forgive those who had hurt her, nor did she need to waste time punishing them. She had won, not because she made them suffer, but because they could no longer hurt her. And for the first time, she felt completely free. That night, the Moretti mansion was eerily quiet. The soft glow of the chandeliers cast shadows on the marble floor, creating faint silhouettes on the walls. Eva sat on the sofa in the living room, a book in her hands, but her eyes weren't focused on the pages. She was deep in thought about everything that had happened, the changes in her life, and how things were no longer the same as before. She had won, but this victory didn't bring her the joy she had once imagined. The bullies who used to torment her no longer dared to approach her. Lena Parker had tried to apologize, but Eva didn't care. She was no longer the weak one, the quiet girl sitting in a corner trying to become invisible. She had changed, and everyone knew it. But what did that change really mean? The sound of footsteps from the hallway pulled Eva out of her thoughts. She looked up and saw her father slowly entering the room. Vincent Moretti wasn't wearing his usual well-tailored suit, but instead a rolled-up shirt and dark trousers. He looked more relaxed than usual, but still carried an undeniable air of authority. He sat down across from Eva, slowly pouring himself a glass of wine. Eva stared at her father, and then, as if unable to hold back any longer, she asked, "Did you ever have a Connor Hayes of your own?" Vincent paused for a moment upon hearing the question, but then he simply smiled lightly. "Everyone has someone like Connor Hayes in their life, Eva." His voice was deep and calm, as though he were telling an old story he had thought about hundreds of times. He gently swirled the wine in his glass, his gaze distant, focused on the amber liquid rippling inside. "The question isn't whether you'll meet someone like that. The question is, will you let them decide who you are, or will you decide that for yourself?" Eva stared at her father, silent for a long time. "What did you do?" Vincent took a sip of his wine, then placed the glass down on the table. His eyes were quiet but profound, as though he were looking back to a time far in the past. "I grew up in a neighborhood where nothing came easily. If you wanted to survive, you had to fight to hold on to what was yours." His voice was steady, but there was a weight to the old memories. "I used to be a skinny, quiet kid, nothing remarkable except for a last name that everyone feared. But there was one guy, the son of a local thug, who thought he could do whatever he wanted. He chose me as his target." Eva listened, not blinking. "What did he do to you?" Vincent smiled faintly, not a humorous smile, but one from a man who had walked through darkness and emerged on the other side. "Nothing special," he said in a low voice. "The same old tricks they all like to play, shoving me, saying taunting words, taking things from others as if it was their right." Then he looked directly at Eva. But the problem wasn't what he did, the problem was how long I let him do it. Eva understood immediately. That was the thing she had struggled with all these years, the silence. Silence that made people like Connor Hayes think they could do anything without being stopped. Vincent continued, his voice sharpening. "One day, I realized that if I didn't stop him, he would never stop, and I did what needed to be done." Eva looked at her father, trying to find some emotion in his eyes, maybe regret, maybe pride. But all she saw was absolute certainty. "Did you kill him?" Vincent chuckled softly, then shook his head. "No, Eva." He took another sip of wine. "I didn't need to do that. I just needed to make sure he would never dare touch me again." Eva remained silent, feeling every word of her father's sink into her mind, like a warning, like a lesson she needed to engrave in her soul. She had once thought that power came from hurting others, that if she didn't want to be bullied anymore, she had to become the most dangerous person in the room. But now she understood that what made people like Connor Hayes afraid wasn't violence. It was the unpredictability. That night, lying in bed, Eva couldn't stop thinking about what her father had said. She understood why Connor was scared of her, why he disappeared without a word of protest. It wasn't because he was defeated in a fight. It wasn't because he was publicly threatened by someone. It was because he couldn't know what would happen next. Just like the person who once bullied her father in the past, he didn't disappear because he was punished right away. He disappeared because he couldn't handle the fear of not knowing what might happen to him. Eva didn't have to lift a finger. She just had to exist, unyielding. And that was enough to make others tremble in fear. The next morning, when Eva stepped out of her bedroom, her father was still sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper as usual. She approached, hesitated for a moment, then asked quietly, "Do you think I did the right thing?" Vincent put down the newspaper, looking at her for a long while. Then he nodded, a faint smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. "You didn't let others decide who you are, Eva?" He picked up his glass of wine and took a small sip. "And that's all that matters." Eva realized she no longer needed to do anything. She had won, not through violence, not through acts of revenge, but through the silent fear that had tightly gripped the minds of those who once saw her as a target. Connor Hayes was gone. No one knew exactly what happened to him, but everyone knew the reason. No one dared to speak openly, but the whispers behind her back, the fearful glances whenever his name was mentioned, were the clearest evidence. And the scariest thing for those who had once mocked Eva was the fact that she hadn't done anything at all. She didn't speak up. She didn't seek justice. She didn't react. Her silence alone was enough to make them panic, because they didn't know what she was thinking. They didn't know what plans she had. They didn't know if one day she would suddenly appear with a slight smile and an unavoidable verdict. Before, Eva had always thought that to avoid being bullied, she had to become stronger than the others. She had to fight back, rise up, make them feel the pain they had caused her. But now she understood that true strength wasn't in violence. It was in absolute control. Those who had once bullied her now couldn't face the very wrongs they had committed. Those who had once looked at her with disdain no longer dared to meet her eyes. Those who had once thought she was the weakest in the school now understood that they themselves were the truly weak ones. Eva didn't need to prove any of this. They understood it on their own, and that was the greatest victory. Some people learn their lesson early, while others learn it too late. Lena Parker was one of those who learned it too late. Since the day Connor disappeared, Lena had tried to approach Eva, tried to apologize, tried to justify what she had done. But Eva didn't need to hear those apologies. She didn't need Lena to kneel and beg for forgiveness. She had won, not because she had been compensated, but because Lena would forever live with the fear that she could never make up for what she had done. In the days that followed, Lena grew quieter. No more confidence, no more fake smiles, no more cruel taunts. Lena couldn't return to her old group of friends because no one wanted to be associated with her. Those who had once laughed at Eva now didn't want to be involved with her either. She became a lonely shadow, a living reminder of the downfall of someone who had once thought herself strong. That day, when Eva walked down the school hallway, she felt for the first time that she was truly free. No one looked at her with pity. No one whispered about her behind her back. No one dared to be hostile toward her anymore. She had survived the storm, and now the storm had passed. Eva no longer walked like someone trying to hide. No more lowering her head. No more keeping silent out of fear. She walked with absolute confidence, not the arrogance of someone seeking revenge, but the calm of someone who no longer needed to seek revenge. The days of suffering were over. The fears had been cast aside. And now, Ava Moretti had become herself, a person no longer defined by anyone, no longer controlled by anyone, no longer letting anyone determine her worth. She had reclaimed herself. And that was true freedom. The hallways of Westridge High School had never been this quiet. There were no more snickers behind Eva's back, no more whispers every time she walked by. Those who had once been part of the crowd mocking her, those who had once seen her as a joke, no longer dared to look her in the eye. And this time, she was no longer the victim. Eva walked, not fast, not slow, not needing to appear strong or intimidating. She was simply herself, and that was enough. There was something unspoken, something everyone knew but no one dared to say. Connor Hayes had learned his lesson. Somehow, he had disappeared from the school, from the town, from the lives of those who once followed him. No one knew exactly what had happened, but everyone understood that some things were better left unsaid. Connor was no longer here. Those who had supported him had found ways to distance themselves from his shadow, and most importantly, no one dared to take his place. Westridge had once had an order where the strong could trample the weak, but after Connor disappeared, no one dared to step up to fill his position. Because now, everyone understood there were lines you shouldn't cross. Because now, they knew not everyone was an easy target. Because now, they knew that sometimes the weak were not as weak as they seemed. Lena Parker was still at the school, but she was no longer the same person. Those who had once surrounded her were gone. No one wanted to be associated with the name Connor Hayes anymore, and no one wanted to mention the day everything changed. Lena once had everything: status, attention, the protection of someone stronger. But now all she had left was silence. One day, when Ava walked past Lena in the hallway, she instinctively lowered her head, as if by reflex. Ava gave her a brief glance. No pity, no contempt, just a fleeting look. Then she continued walking. Lena didn't say anything, because this time she had nothing left to say. Eva no longer ate lunch alone. Not because she needed anyone to sit with her, not because she was trying to make friends, but because this time others had come to her first. Sophia Reed, who had once only watched from a distance, was now one of the few brave enough to sit next to Eva. She didn't ask about Connor, didn't ask about what had happened, because she understood that some stories didn't need to be retold. One day, as they sat eating lunch, Sophia suddenly looked up at Eva, hesitating slightly before asking, "Did you ever think it would end up like this?" Eva paused for a moment, then took a sip of water and replied nonchalantly, "No, but I knew it had to end this way." Sophia nodded, as if she understood, because that was the truth. The storm had passed, and Ava was still here. When Eva got home that evening, her father was sitting in his usual chair, a glass of liquor in hand, his gaze as sharp as ever. He didn't ask her about school, didn't ask her about the people who had once bullied her, because he knew she had already figured it all out. Vincent Moretti was not the type of man to speak much. He just looked at his daughter for a moment, then lifted his glass toward her, silently acknowledging her. Ava understood the meaning of that gesture. It wasn't praise, it wasn't congratulations. It was simply an acknowledgement that she had weathered the storm without being swept away. She didn't need anyone to tell her she had changed. She knew she had, and that was enough. The next morning, when Eva walked into school, the atmosphere was the same as any other day. Rows of lockers lined the hallway. The bells rang to signal class time. The cautious glances from those who had once looked down on her, but this time no one dared to see her as a victim anymore. No one dared to laugh. No one dared to test her limits. She had survived the worst of times, and now she was no longer bound by the past. She had walked through the storm. She had left everything behind. And now she walked as if no one could ever hurt her again. Eva Moretti's story wasn't just about revenge or power, but about survival and how she reclaimed herself. She didn't need to use violence to get back at those who had hurt her. She didn't need to shout for justice. She only needed to exist without fear. Connor Hayes had learned his lesson, but more importantly, Eva had learned the most important lesson of all. No one has the right to define who she is except for herself. And that was the real victory. But that raises a question for you. If you were Eva, what would you do when faced with someone like Connor Hayes? Would you stay silent and endure, or would you stand up in your own way? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked this story and want to hear more tales about justice, strength, and deep life lessons, like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos. Remember, in this world, true power is not in the loudest voice, but in the one who doesn't need to prove it.